Okay, today's topic is a project called the Neuro-Symbolic Concept Learner, a project done by a group of students and faculty at MIT during the last year or so. And it uses a data set that was developed by a group at Stanford called the Clever data set. So we'll see what is it that they were able to do on this topic of neuro-symbolic concept learner. So it's an interesting project which brings in the different ideas we've been talking about. And why this particular project that I chose, we've been discussing robust artificial intelligence and how robust artificial intelligence requires components of both neural AI as well as symbolic AI, and so we saw that a amalgamation of the two would be somewhat analogous to the Kahneman's thinking fast, thinking slow type of architecture as well. So it kind of brings all of it together in a very concrete terms. It's a modest project, but it gives you the sense of the possibilities. Okay, so with that preamble, I'm going to begin with the slides on the neuro-symbolic concept learner. Okay, here are the slides for the neuro-symbolic concept learner. Okay, so here we are. It's been abbreviated as NSCL, Neuro-Symbolic Concept Learner. The topics that we will cover in this lecture are what is the role of NSCL within the broader topic of robust artificial intelligence? That's what we are trying to study, robust AI, and where does that fit in? And we will talk about a concept called natural supervision, as opposed to the standard supervised learning and unsupervised learning. There's a kind of supervision which is called natural supervision. Basically, it is how do human beings learn? We don't learn it by repeatedly being told that this is a dog, 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 or this is a cat, this is a cat. That is not a natural supervision. In natural supervision, they take it that there is some kind of conversation that goes along, saying somebody makes a remark about a dog in the presence of a dog, and so you kind of learn that that must be a dog. So that is a kind of natural supervision we're talking about here. And there is a particular data set that was created at Stanford called the Clever data set. So we'll talk about that. Topic number 3 is the actual neuro-symbolic concept learner architecture, which has got the perceptual part and the symbolic language part. And then the training of this NSCL architecture, which actually takes the symbolic part and somehow feeds it back into the perceptual part. And then we will talk in topic number 5 of performance and generalization. How well did this neuro-symbolic concept learner do on a particular data set, the Clever data set? And what kind of generalization can it perform beyond the particular data set? And we'll finally conclude in topic number 6 is how does it all fit into the Kahneman systems 1 and 2 we began the semester with. So that will be kind of the wrap up of that. Okay. So first of all, we talked about robust artificial intelligence, which is not brittle, that it breaks down with small changes and so on. Robust AI was described as residing in the intersection of learning and symbol manipulation. It is not just learning from raw data, but also has some knowledge incorporated into it. So in these Venn diagrams here, we have this particular set is a learning. Learning is from multi-layer perceptrons, the transformer, CNN trained by backprop. All right, so all of these methods all involve learning. And then we have this circle here is the symbolic operation, symbol manipulation, operations over variables. ELIZA is an example. And there were a couple other methods here. And something based on records is psych. And then this NSCL lies here based on records. And it has got symbol manipulation. It also has learning from machine learning, standard deep learning type of thing. So it's at the intersection of both. So this NSCL is said to be in the intersection of both deep learning and symbol manipulation. And another argument that was given in robust artificial intelligence is that robust AI needs machinery for spatial, physical, psychological, temporal, causal, different types of reasoning it should have. Current neural networks lack explicit mechanisms for these forms of reasoning. And and ways for representing and reasoning over such domains. We have ELIZA, GPT-2, BERT, multi-layer perceptrons trained by backprop. Spatial reasoning is something very special to regions of an image or three-dimensional world. CNS trained by backprop can do spatial reasoning. And on the symbolic side of things, we have temporal reasoning, causal reasoning, physical reasoning, psychological reasoning. Within physical reasoning is where NSCL comes in. So we are now talking about a project called NSCL, Neuro-Symbolic Concept Learner. This particular project lies at the intersection of spatial reasoning and physical reasoning. And it also could include causal reasoning and temporal reasoning. And so we're just placing it here. So here is a project that lies that uses these kinds of reasoning. And the previous slide we saw, here is a project that lies at the intersection of symbol manipulation and deep learning. Okay, let's begin by looking at visual question answering data set, VQA data set. So these are projects that computer vision people use, and it's being used in a different way for this NSCL project. The clever data set is a diagnostic data set for compositional language and elementary visual reasoning. This is the Stanford group. They created this data set where they had all these objects, sizes, colors, shapes, and materials. There are large gray metal sphere, large red metal cube, small blue metal cylinder, small green metal sphere, large brown rubber sphere, large purple rubber cylinder, small cyan rubber cube, small yellow rubber sphere. The world is made up of these sorts of objects. And these objects could be placed, there's concept of left versus right. These objects are to the left here, and these objects are to the right here. In front, behind, some of these objects are in front, and some of these objects are behind. So they created a data set of these sorts of objects to see how well their computer vision algorithms would be able to find what kind of relationships might exist, some elementary visual reasoning that's possible. So they created this data set. And they also created from these data sets natural language questions about images, so that some kind of a system for reasoning with these kinds of images, we can evaluate how good they are. So these are the three images we saw: sizes, left versus right, in front and behind. In the middle are examples of questions and their associated functional programs. So we have, for example, a question: what color is the cube to the right of the yellow sphere? What color is the cube to the right of the yellow? That's kind of a question. I guess this doesn't apply to this scene, but that would be a kind of question. And they call this as a chain structured question. What color? So it's saying there's a filter color and there is a filter shape. And then, so this is yellow and this is sphere here. So the filter color, it says it's a yellow is the filtered color out of all the possible colors. Then shape, out of all the possible shapes, it is sphere. And unique, we are talking about a unique answer to it. And relate is which type of a relationship it is, right? And then what kind of a shape it is, again, cube. And the unique answer and the query to the color. So what color is the cube to the right of the yellow sphere is they refer to it as a simple chain structured question. And these ideas of value, objects, filter, for example, from the set of objects, you have a filter with a certain attribute like filter color, and it gives you the particular objects with that particular value, right? So like that we have objects and or give other objects, so on. So they defined all these things, a function catalog. So they're saying this is the kind of question: what color is the cube to the right of the yellow sphere? And the answer may be, well, it is it could be, I suppose here, if the yellow sphere, it could be, say, cyan or something, or blue. And sample tree structured question: how many cylinders are in front of the small thing and on the left side of the green object? So here we have some parallel operations happening. How many cylinders are in front of us? So we're talking about filter color green, unique, relate to the left, and filter size small. So there was a green object, that's where the green came in here. And then filter size small, a unique, relate, and then filter color shape. So anyway, the question is, how many cylinders are in front? There's a correct answer to all of these. What color is the cube to the right of the yellow sphere? Or how many cylinders are in front of the small thing? And okay, and so that is the kind of question we need to answer. All right, the clever data set is split in this way. So this is just a data set for developing computer vision programs. So they have split the image data set of 100,000 images, 70,000 to training, 15,000 validation, 15,000 testing set. And they've also created some nearly 1 million questions that can be asked of these images. What color is the object to the right of the green cylinder, so on. So questions like that. And out of which these were the number of unique questions. And they said, okay, in the training set, there are all these kinds of, this is the training set, 600 or 700,000 of them, and then validation, testing. So they created a data set like this for use by anybody. And so you have these objects and their organizations, and then they created 100,000 images out of it, created questions using the formalism that we saw earlier on. So what kind of questions are they? They're very formal questions formed using a particular formal analogy. There's either a sequential question or a tree structured questions and so on. So the motivation for NSCL comes in that humans are capable of learning visual concepts by jointly understanding vision and language. So if they're provided such a data set of objects and questions and answers, is it possible to develop a machine learning system with no prior knowledge of color is presented with the images of red and green cubes? So is it possible to have a system that performs by jointly understanding vision and language where these kinds of concepts are mentioned? So the kind of learning that NSCL does is based on natural supervision. It learns from images and question-answer pairs. So there are questions. What is the color of the object to the right of the cylinder? And then the answer would be, say, let's say blue. So there is an answer to it also. So the training involves natural supervision. So learns from images and question answer pairs. Requires no annotations on images or semantic programs for sentences. And like human concept learning, it learns via curriculum learning. So they use what's called as curriculum learning, which says in curriculum learning, in any course, you begin with some simple concepts and then you build on top of that. Curriculum learning is like that. So you first begin with simple object ideas, and then you go on to the left off, right off, and then more complicated questions. And learns representations and concepts of objects from questions. Example, what is the color of the cylinder? On simple scenes, say 3 objects. So we give the question, what's the color of the cylinder? And we also give the answer, blue. By doing so, it learns object-based concepts such as colors and shapes. So it learns from this dialogue what kind of colors are there, what kind of shapes are there, and learns relational concepts, that is left off, right off, by leveraging object-based concepts to interpret object referrals. Right? Is there a box right of a cylinder? Yes or no? So we have the answer also. It learns that there is a box to the right of the cylinder. And the model eventually adapts to more complex scenes and compositional questions, right? The blue object to the right of this and so on. So that would be a complex question. So presentation of images and question answers. System identifies the difference in object visual appearance color and aligns it to the corresponding words in the question and answers red or green. So for instance, it's presented with this image. And here's the question answer pair. What's the color of the object? Answer is red. Is there any cube? Answer is yes. So this is allowing the system to learn that the object that it is seeing here is red in color, and it's also a cube based on this dialogue. Similarly, what's the color of the object? Green. Is there any cube? Yes. So, okay, so this is also a cube, and it is green in color. So it learns from the image as well as from the question answer pair. Learning basic object-based concepts. So we have paired questions and answers. What's the color of the object? Red. Is there any cube? Yes. So we just saw this. What's the color of the object? Green. Is there any cube? Yes. So this is called learning of basic object-based concepts. Learning relational concepts based on referential expression. So there is an image like this. And then the paired questions and answers are, how many objects are right of the red object? So answer is 2. So how many objects have the same material as the cube? Answer is 2. I suppose these 2 are metal, right? So maybe the texture can tell that it's metal. Interpret complex questions from visual cues. Here is the image. Paired question and answer. How many objects are both right of the green cylinder and have the same material as the small blue ball, right? So this is how many objects are right of the green cylinder, I suppose here, and have the same material as the small blue ball. So it is kind of a rubber one here. So this one and this one, maybe, I don't know, maybe this one. The answer seems to be 3 here rather than 4, right? As a small blue ball. So it is saying these 3 balls here. Okay. And here is another one. How many objects are to the right of the green cylinder? There's no right of green cylinder here. Okay. So so this is the idea that you have simple questions and more complex questions. They call it as curriculum learning. So the neuro-symbolic concept learner model learns by looking at images and reading paired questions and answers. And the model learns visual concepts, words, and semantic parsing of sentences, okay, without explicit supervision of any of them. So visual concepts, words, and semantic parsing of sentences. So this neuro-symbolic system, which is presented with images and natural language question answers, has three modules. One is a neural perception module, which looks at the image, extracts object-based representations of the scene. For example, with this image, it's saying, I discovered two objects here. And then object detection, and it actually extracts features from that using a visual perception system, and say this object one is of color green and object two is of color red. It is able to obtain that. A perception module is able to do that. There are systems that can do that. So let's assume that's pretty straightforward for these kinds of geometric objects. It's a neural perception object. Each object represented as a vector embedding of fixed dimension. So there's a particular embedding that it is mapping into based on the features, right? So it is not symbolic, but it's a vector embedding. Semantic parsing module takes a question answer pair, and the question here is there any red object, right? It translates questions into executable programs. So it is basically a parsing. It says is exist filter red. So it is asking the question, is there any red object? And the answer to that is yes or no, does it exist? And if the answer given to it is yes, then the answer to this will be exist filter red is equal to true. Is there any red object translated into two-step program? We refer to the two-step program. There's a filter and then existence. Concept represented vector embeddings in a latent vector space. So this again is a vector space representation that there's a mapping is done here. So we have the neural perception model and then the semantic parsing model. There is a neuro-symbolic reasoning module which executes program to answer the question. So we know for this question there is an answer also. And it first computes the similarities between the concept embedding red and object embeddings to classify both objects. So we are talking about is there an existence of a red, and it is comparing to the two objects here and computing similarity. Presumably similarity is pretty low here, 0.1. It's not exactly 0 because there is some representation here, the vector that it's dealing with. Similarly, a vector it's dealing with, hopefully the similarity is high here as 0.9. And then it answers the question by checking whether a red object has been filtered out. So it takes the result of the similarity score saying the answer here is yes. So the score is here taken to be 0.9. So this is what's being passed over and saying that is the correct answer. During training, it receives ground truth answer as supervision and back propagates training signals. Okay, so even here, we're talking about some back propagation. If the score came out to be something else, then it should be yes, it should be the high value. So that can propagate back into this network. There's a Maxian similarity here, and that network, or even back to the objects that are being discovered. And that has to be changed, that there is a red object. So in a way, you can see how the neuro-symbolic reasoning module is already putting together something coming from the parsing module and feeding it back into the perception module. Reads out the perceptual representation of objects, classifies their attribute relations, and executes the program to obtain an answer. So these are the three parts to it. So it is dealing with an embedding space here. The visual perception module is converting this red one into a vector here. And what does that mean? It is some high dimensional space here. There's a vector associated with red. That is this part of the space here. And what they're showing here is some high dimensional space, which is being divided into two parts, a dichotomy. So for instance, vectors that are blue are in this region, not blue are in the other region. Vectors that represent cubes are in this region, and here they're not cubes. Here is a region which is all red, vectors that are red, and here is not red. And here is vectors corresponding to objects. And the other side is vectors. I guess this vertical one is not that one. So now in this space, we have a vector corresponding to red. I guess this is perpendicular to this particular dichotomy. Usually, the way you divide the space is by means of a hyperplane. And a hyperplane is perfectly represented by a vector from the origin perpendicular to the hyperplane. So this is the vector that corresponds to V red. This is the vector that corresponds to cube. This is the vector that corresponds to blue, and this is the vector that corresponds to object. So they're referring to this as a concept object embedding space. And exist filter red. So this is saying, okay, there is, we are talking about this particular vector, exist filter red. So is there an object that is red, I suppose, that is being asked? So we have red region here, and then there's an object region. Is there a particular region over here to this side, and so on? So in a way, this is kind of a visual feeling for what is going on here in terms of objects coming from the perceptual scene, and then concepts coming from the symbolic domain. And these are all being put together in one space, which is kind of makes it extremely interesting. So a joint learning of visual concepts, words, and parsing. So here is a scene with 4 objects, and this is shown as theta V, visual representation, object 1, object 2, object 3, object 4. There are vectors here. And there are concept embeddings corresponding to sphere in the same space. And so there is a connection between the second part. Second part is, what is the shape of the red object left of the sphere? Red object left of the sphere, I guess. So semantic parsing is candidate interpretations. Query, shape, filter, red, relate, left filters. Query, shape, filter, sphere. So there are all possible questions, dot, 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 out of which only one is right. The query that's being asked is shape, filter, red, relate, so on. And this question is also answered here. The answer is there is a cylinder, and there is a cylinder. I guess one of these is a cylinder here. And the ground truth is a box for that cylinder. And so this information is now being back propagated to change the visual representation. And it is also being back propagated to change the concept embedding. So we have visual embedding and the concept embedding all in the same space. Visual perception module detects objects and extracts a latent representation for each of them. Semantic parsing module translates input question into an executable program given a domain-specific language. So this is the symbolic reasoning part of it. So this is how they're tying the 2 parts using some kind of a common representation for objects and concepts. A little bit more detail here on the concept quantization. Visual reasoning determines object attributes, color, shape. Each attribute contains a set of visual concepts, example cube, and attributes are neural mapping of object representations into an embedding. So here we have a scene, and there is a particular, this is like a 3-filter RGB, I suppose. These are the filters here. And that is all mapped into a vector. And there is a shape of operator that takes this vector as input and maps it here. So this would be the raw image representation, which is now going into a shape of type of representation. So then what they're doing over here is there are shapes of cube over here, shapes of sphere over here, shapes of cylinder over here. So it's computing a similarity of this red object. Is it close to cube, or is it close to sphere, or close to cylinder? It's computing some kind of a similarity. It finds a very high similarity with the cube here. It says 0.99. So visual perception module is giving us something, and then we are computing some similarity function to say this is similar to a cube here. Concepts, example, cube, sphere, cylinder are learned vectors. Cosine, so what is the similarities? A cosine distance, the vectors determine the shape of the object. The similarity is computing by cosine vector, right? Cosine between two vectors is 0 if it's identical, and it is close to 1 if it is far apart. Probability that object OI is a cube is sigmoid of shape of OI. This particular square brackets correspond to the cosine distance between the vector for the cube and the shape of OI. So this is the shape of the ith object, and we are computing the distance between these here, and there is some normalization things here, gamma and tau. Shape of denotes the neural operator. V cube, the concept embedding of cube. Sigma is the sigmoid function, and gamma and tau are scalar constants for scaling and shifting similarity values. So classifying relational concepts, example, left between a pair of objects done similarly, except concatenate visual representations for both objects to form the representation, their relationship. So this is the kind of operations that go on the idea of inference of an object shape and influencing it by the vectors for cube, sphere, cylinder, etc. All right, so the visual module, they used a pre-trained mask RCNN, generates object proposals for objects. Bounding box of object paired with its image is sent to a ResNet34 to extract the region-based ROI align, image-based features. So they concatenate them to represent each object. So this is all about computer vision details that's being given. Let's assume that there is a particular network called a ResNet34. It does that. Inclusion of the representation, the full scene adds context, which is essential for relative attributes. The semantic parsing also uses some specialized language here called DSL, stands for domain-specific language. Semantic parsing translates question into executable program with a hierarchy of primitive operations. And this particular domain-specific language is designed for visual question answering, and a set of operators for visual reasoning. For example, filtering out objects with concepts, and then operation share, same input-output interface, thus combined to form programs of any complexity. Semantic parser. So we also need a parser for the sentences. Semantic parser is done using GRU, a bidirectional GRU encode. GRU is like an LSTM. Encodes the input question, which outputs a fixed length embedding of the question. And a decoder based on GRE cells is applied to the embedding and recovers the hierarchy of operations as a latent program. All right, so so this is so they're bringing in deep learning methods even for processing these sentences, but eventually it's a symbolic representation that they build. So quasi-symbolic program execution. Given the latent program recovered from the question in natural language, question was in natural language, processed by GRU, a symbolic program executor executes the program and derives the answer based on the object-based visual representation. And the program executor is a collection of deterministic functional modules to realize logic operations specified in the domain-specific language. Another thing they point out is that in order to do backpropagation, you need differentiability. And they're saying differentiability with respect to visual operations. Intermediate results are probabilistic. The set of objects is a vector. The attention mask over all objects. Mask I belong to 0, 1 denotes probability the ith objects belong to the set. First filter outputs a mask of length 4. So what they're showing here is illustrative execution of NSCL. Does the red object to the left of the green cube have the same shape as the purple matte thing? All right, here's a question about this scene. And visual parsing is that, you know, it just processes imaging object 1, object 2, object 3, object 4 bounding boxes. And here is a semantic parsing and program execution of this particular sentence here. And it is applying these filter relationships and so on. So the first thing it's looking at here is output green cube. There are 4 possible outputs here. And then this is green cube. And then the left of this green cube, left. And then there's a red object, and then the purple matte, and so on. And so these are masks that are used to say what is being said here. The filters are used here and to relate the question in terms of these concepts that are generated here. So as for the training of this whole network, it's got a 2-part objective: concept learning and language understanding. So they're trying to do both at the same time. And it's necessary to find optimal parameters. Theta V of the visual perception module, perception, including the ResNet 34 for extracting object features, attribute operators, and concept embeddings. So, and theta S of the semantic parsing module, semantic parse, to maximize the likelihood of answering question Q correctly. So it says theta V comma theta S. So it's both the sets of vectors, argmax over theta V, theta S of the expected value of the probability A equal to executor perception as theta V comma P. So P is denotes the program, and this is P, and A is the answer, S is the scene, executor is the quasi-symbolic executor, and the expectation is taken over the probability distribution over semantic parse QS. So this is how the whole objective is stated. It's kind of interesting that this complicated scenario is brought into a formal statement of what is the objective function you're going to try and optimize. And the optimization is to compute the gradient with respect to V as this quantity we just saw, the derivative of this quantity, right? Compute the gradient. And they use a particular program called reinforce, comes from reinforcement learning literature, optimizes the semantic parsers theta S using this formulation where reward R equal to, there's a reward here, R equal to 1. The answer is correct and 0 otherwise. So it's a simple 1-0 reward. Off-policy search is used to reduce the variance of reinforce. So they used these kinds of ideas. Reinforcement learning also comes into play here. And here is a bit more about the curriculum visual concept learning. So curriculum concept learning is to split the training sample into 4 stages: learning object level visual concepts, learning relational questions, learning complex questions with perception modules, and joint fine-tuning of all modules. And this was found essential to the learning of NSCL. So this is about increasing level of complexity. Lesson 1, object-based question. Lesson 2, relational questions. Lesson 3 is more complex questions, and deploy complex scenes, complex questions. So this idea they refer to as curriculum concept learning. And as for the data set, they train NSCL on 5,000 images, less than 10% of Clever's 70,000 training images. Generate 20 questions for each image for the entire curriculum learning process. And the MaskR CNN module is pre-trained on 4K generated Clever images with bounding box annotations. So what they did was to compare the performance of this NSCL versus baseline. So baseline means these are computer vision programs that answer things like how many red objects are there, right? Simply doing that using a neural network maybe, right? There's no natural language input as such. Evaluation, simple questions like that. Evaluated performance on all concepts in the Clever data set. And NSCL outperforms both convolutional and attentional baselines. So this table shows that NSCL is over here, and then this is a convolutional baseline, and these two are some attentional baselines. So it seems like this NSCL is doing better, I suppose, because it has additional information in the form of a question and answer going along with each image. So the summary of NSCL performance is that it's interpretable and robust visual reasoning, and it gets state-of-the-art performance on Clever data set, and naturally learns disentangled visual and language concepts. So there are visual concepts, language concepts. So it's able to generalize with respect to both visual scenes and semantic programs. Generalization beyond this, generalization to scenes with more objects and longer semantic programs than those in the training set. So it does generalize. Generalizes to new visual attribute compositions. There is another second data set on Clever that they used. And adaptation to new visual concepts such as learning a new color, and then learned visual concepts transferred to new tasks such as image caption retrieval. So they did some generalization. And they looked at also extension to natural images rather than the particular, the world of geometric objects. For example, here, what color is the fire hydrant? And there's a question, and that's being translated by these filters, filter fire hydrant, and the query is color. And the answer to that question is yellow. So they're presented here saying what color is the fire hydrant is the natural language question. The answer is yellow, which is used to back propagate back to this part as well as to the visual part. They wrote a second paper on this topic, which was presented at NIPS. The first paper, NSCL, was an ICLR paper. This is a NIPS paper on meta-concept learning. They're saying the standard ones are visual reasoning questions. Is there a red cube? Yes. Is there any green sphere? Yes. Meta-concept question. Do red and green describe the same property of objects? All right. So the answer is yes. So that's also in the training set. In the testing set, you have visual composition generalization. Is there any red object? And it should say yes. It's a different object. It should say yes to that. Meta-concept generalization. Do cube and sphere describe the same property of objects? Yes, answer. So it has to answer this. So this is a meta-concept as opposed to red and green or concrete, in this case, same property. And they give another example here of the parsing of the first sentence and the parsing of, for example, is there any red objects? Is exist filter red? Parsing of this one to red and green describe the same property objects is parsing is meta verify red green. So there is a verification of exist, or in this case meta verify. And then we saw this flow visual reasoning question in neuro-symbolic reasoning. Here for the meta concept, something similar goes on to be able to answer them. So this is the idea of generalization from specific concrete assignment to a more general concept. And so they called the system as a neuro-symbolic meta-concept learner. And they compared it against all kinds of things here. GRU language only, GRU with CNN, and then they had BERT, the famous language program with two variants. And then they had this NSCL and the NSML or the VCML, they call it here. So the performance of this one, Meta Learner, was higher than any of these others. And so there's give some examples of meta concept generalization and based on synonyms and of same kind and so on. It's kind of interesting examples. So we'll conclude by talking about the NSCL and Kahneman's systems 1 and 2. We saw this early on, that Kahneman had this idea of thinking fast and thinking slow. And we talked about some research problems in these concepts. And so these are the 10 issues on research issues. For example, what are the capabilities of systems 1 and 2? If we think of the perception module as system 1 and the language module as system 2, what kind of features do they use? Of course, the first one is using features done by the particular CNN or the ResNet or whatever was used. And then the second one is also using, it's more on the symbolic level because it is kind of parsing the sentence. And then we ask the question, is system 2 inherently sequential? I guess the answer is yes. And then what are the metrics to evaluate the performance of systems? We saw some measures of the performance in terms of how well was it able to identify the correct objects. And then introspection in systems 1 and 2. Can M-conscious alone solve the problem? So here we're asking, can the perception module alone solve the problem? I guess the answer is not, because we are introducing some concepts here of even red and shape and all that. And governance is switching between the systems. Recognize when each system to be used. Can that be said here? And then reasoning when using both systems. Heuristics of system 1 with careful reasoning of system 2. So how is the reasoning being done on the two systems? Ethics theories tied to systems 1 and 2 decide if action is moral or not. So I guess this elementary example that doesn't arise. Abstraction, attention, knowledge graphs, skills transferable to another environment. So what has been learned here can be used on, maybe other types of objects. And combining multi-agent systems, several AI systems communicating, is it possible to use the capability with other systems and architectures for supporting this vision of AI, contributing to building a model of the world? So is it possible to interact? Not that all these questions are applicable to NSCL, but this is how we stated out, saying if you're going to do an NSCL project involving the two types of systems, these are the kinds of questions to ask to say how good your system is. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop at this point. And do you have any questions on this NSCL project as such? Okay, so we will conclude at this point, and we will continue with some more ideas of neuro-symbolic methods next time, and then we'll discuss your individual projects. Okay.